Hello, Elisa. It's very nice to meet you today on our videocast. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I've been impressed by some of the things that are now going on in the protein design space. It's a hot area in 2023. It's just the internet is on the rise in terms of news. Various companies are advancing, but of course, everything started, as I may imagine, by the success of AlphaFold, which basically streamlined this trend a couple of years ago. But can you share your view about the industry, about where it's going, like in general picture, and how your company is changing the game in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe zooming out one step, like why do we even care about proteins, right? They play such a fundamental role in new drug discovery, in better diagnostics, but even outside of the field of drug design in working towards planetary health. I think the field right now with AI advances in how we design protein is really, it's speeding up. As you said, AlphaFold caused a huge ripple. It's a super exciting time to be in the field. What we're focusing on at Cradle is to help teams working in R&D to optimize proteins to do this faster and more easily and more cheaply with the help of generative machine learning. Why this is important is that much of the inspiration that we take from nature, from the starting points of proteins, is extremely useful, but often we need to make small tweaks to these proteins in order to have them meet the goals in our process, whether that is the new drug or a new diagnostic or such. And these designs still have to be tested in the wet lab. And what we really believe at Cradle is that by bringing generative machine learning approaches into this design, build, and test loop, we can help to make it faster and easier for teams to develop the proteins with the right characteristics for later commercial use. And the approach that we're taking to building Cradle is offering it as software. And so teams can use Cradle for the in silico design of new protein variants, and then use their own wet lab capabilities to run the experiments and validate that these proteins are actually improving towards their end goal.
So the business model is software as a service kind of stuff.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. And so we've shown that we now have over 9 partners, so covering around 12 projects. And these can range from innovative startups with smaller teams to large enterprise players like Johnson & Johnson Innovation and Novozymes and others.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And like the field of large language models is really growing, and I assume your company is actually using some of that technologies, because at the end of the day, the proteins can be written like actual biological language, basically.
Correct.
The amino acids connecting together and making sense of, like, essentially creating sentences with biological meaning. But everybody is talking now about, for example, if we're talking about ChatGPT, while probably everybody's impressed by what's happening now, but everybody's talking about some of the limitations of these kind of technologies. For example, hallucination, so-called hallucination, where sentences might be incorrectly formed, or some answers might be made up or something like that. I assume in biology it's a different story, different context for this. But can you shed some light on maybe some of the limitations? Because we will talk a lot about opportunities. Opportunities are great, I know that, but let's start first with some of the limitations, and maybe some ways to address them, and what you are actually doing to address those limitations.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the old paradigm of using machine learning in biology was that you had to first collect tens of thousands of data points to train your first model before you could get any use out of it, right? And so it was reserved for like the larger of screening campaigns, for example.
Yep.
If you imagine having a protein problem, a protein challenge, and going out to any random person on the street and asking them for help. You have to give them a lot of information before they become useful and start contributing to your project. With these large language models, we now see that you get access to like let's say, a PhD protein engineer that has developed intuition about the protein space by having observed and intimately studied all of the proteins that we know that are available in public domain today. That offers a really great starting point. But of course, that protein engineer or that model won't always know specifically what protein you're dealing with and what the context is of the experiment and the process that you need this protein to work in. And so what's really important is that you still bring in the data from the wet lab as you're making changes and testing what their effect is in the wet lab. And so you definitely cannot predict improvements of proteins and expect them to be 100% correct, similar to, having to test the outcome of a ChatGPT prediction. And the thing with biological experiments, of course, is that in contrast to ChatGPT, where you can look at an answer and go, that looks plausible, or maybe do a quick Google search and validate it. In biology, it takes up much longer, and it's a much harder process to determine if a change was successful. And so typically that can take like 8 to 12 weeks, and there's a lot of intricacies in that wet lab process. And so at Cradle, the approach that we're taking is working on improving the infrastructure, so the models, so that they're really able to learn from smaller batches of experimental data that are gathered in the labs of our users, and then trying to both reduce the option that a model has for hallucinating, and there's really cool machine learning tricks in order to reduce that, but also still recognizing that designs have to be tested and allowing our users to make the most out of the data that they do generate in their lab.
Sounds really like you can accelerate the process and make it probably cheaper. So it reminds me, I'm coming from the small molecule background, so my focus was primarily in small molecule drug discovery as a chemist by my education background. But I'm getting more and more impressed by what biology is now where biology is now going in this respect, because obviously the biologics are on the rise. With that, my next question is about the modalities. Like, protein design can be applied to many things. I imagine one of the cool modalities in antibody design, for example, or some other interesting stuff. But where your company is now working and what you guys are doing, like what you are prioritizing as the first iteration of your product launch, let's say, or service launch?
So it's true that the protein field is so broad. There's many different versions of proteins, whether they're enzymes, antibodies, diagnostic proteins, and many more types that R&D teams are going after. At Cradle, we work across a range of different modalities. I can't disclose exactly which ones we're working on with our current customers, but we've seen that, for example, in the field of enzymes, we're able to significantly speed up the R&D process, so that companies that use Cradle can test fewer experiments over a fewer total number of rounds to get to their end goal. And we're doing active research into different areas of the protein world. Yeah.
Then I've read somewhere that you can also apply technology to some other industries, like food industry or something like that, which requires protein design capabilities. So is it just planning for the future, or it's already an actually going thing?
So the cool thing is that these large language models and proteins in general, they don't have an opinion, right, on where they are being used. And so we don't confine ourselves only to the pharma space. There are really cool projects that you can see already out there commercially available and inspired by biology. I can't talk about specific programs that we're working on, but Companies that were super inspired by are those like Sologen, who are making chemicals from using biocatalysis, so enzymes, and doing that in a carbon negative way. Companies like Geno, who have a bio-based nylon and other like platform chemicals, and companies like Hue, making more sustainable processes for example, dyes. And it also extends into food. If you think about the alternative proteins or like advanced ingredients, functional ingredients.
Mhm.
And even in, for example, the pharma field, like thinking about not just the action of proteins, so their functionality, but also like manufacturability. Like how do you ensure that a protein can actually be produced, that it can be shipped, that it has the right shelf life, and that it really works as intended. So I think there's huge opportunity for proteins to have a positive impact both on human health as well as the planetary sustainability. Yeah.
I have a bit of a technical question here. If it's pharma, like proteins, they typically react with something. Let's say if we talk about protein complexes with ligands, uh, can this kind of models, like I've heard about limitations of AlphaFold, for example, when it comes to modeling, protein ligand interactions, let's say, or something like that. Can you comment something where the field is moving in this direction, and maybe you also are doing some kind of research in this area?
Yeah. So if you think about large language models, they model a protein like a sentence, right? And they can suggest which changes to make to that sentence to make it to improve it. These models don't take structure explicitly into account, and they don't also model like how a protein binds to its ligand, for example. They don't do that explicitly, and so they learn by proxy, by the wet lab data that you feed into the system. And so we show that, for example, for enzymes, we can improve activity without telling the model, especially the chemical structure of the substrate, for example.
Wow.
There are model architectures that can start to do this as well. Like diffusion models are now upcoming. So I think different protein challenges will have different suitable machine learning approaches to tackle them. What is definitely further out is like full de novo design of proteins. And so where we're focusing as Cradle is really more in the optimization of systems that already have some of the desired functionality.
Great. Sounds great. By the way, your startup is located in Europe, right? In Netherlands.
Yeah. Yeah.
I live in Europe too. I live in Spain, and I
Yes.
know I've traveled the United States quite a lot, and I know there is a very different dynamics, in this biotech startup field in general, in the venture capital field in Europe. The situation here is very different. The traditions, cultural aspects maybe are very different from, let's say, the United States. How can you comment? I'm curious. Can you explain what it feels like building a venture capital or a venture funded company in Europe versus, let's say, might have been in the United States?
Yeah, at Cradle, the co-founding group exists of so it's myself from a bioengineering background. I was formerly at Zymergen in California. My co-founder Harman was also there. Steph and Eli had spent time at Google in the Bay Area, and so we were all familiar with the context of tech and startups in the Bay Area. What we see in Europe in starting the company is that there is an increasing attention to both artificial intelligence as well as biotechnology at the level of the European Union. And what we find is that there is actually really good hubs of talent in Europe that we're benefiting from. So the company, we have a wet lab in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. a lot of biotechnology historically in the Netherlands that we can benefit from. And in Zurich, we have most of our machine learning team. And so we're very close to institutions like ETH, EPFL, as well as the larger tech companies like Google and Meta. So the climate actually for running such a company is quite good in Europe, in our experience.
Amsterdam is a very nice place as well. I've traveled there with my wife. In 2021, I guess it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
Amazing
you're welcome to
travel.
stop by our lab anytime.
Okay, I will. If I visit this year, I will certainly come by.
Feel free to. Yeah, it's really cool to have a wet lab within Cradle. Like we use it for R&D, so validating our models internally, building case studies that we can talk about a little bit more freely, but also to keep that connection between software engineers and the bioengineers very close to make sure that everyone in the company is really intimately familiar with the life of a biologist running protein engineering work in the wet lab. So we welcome visitors as well.
Thank you. I'd like to also hear your opinion about there is a trend for lab automation, these robotic labs that run preclinical experimentation, seed bio experiments, etc. And I may imagine your approach, your software package is a very good fit to this kind of trend, because essentially you can like plug in the intelligence into the machines essentially. But the field is in early days. And what might be your prognosis as to when we can really build the full scale industrial scale, I would say, drug discovery pipelines where the actual laboratories are doing everything using artificial intelligence, robots, running here and there and mixing stuff and feeding information back to the system and improving and all that kind of stuff. It sounds like sci-fi so far, but like I have seen a lot of companies doing that, like in small molecule drugs. And Arcturus in the UK, for example. So many companies experimented. But from your work with your clients, partners, do you believe it's something that is coming within like 1, 2, 3 years, or it's something that will take decades to mature?
So what we've seen is that the cost of experimentation has been coming down for decades, right? With the advent of next generation sequencing technologies, making DNA sequencing a lot cheaper, as well as new DNA synthesis technologies and advanced analytical experiments. So I think we're on a clear downward trajectory when it comes to the cost per experiment. And to answer your question, like that future is here already. Like there are definitely ways in which you can make like a standalone work cell that takes recommendations, builds the DNA, expresses the proteins, tests them, and feeds that back into the machine learning. So there are organizations and teams doing that, and we're building a version of that in our wet lab as well. The cool thing, though, is that that's not a prerequisite for getting value from machine learning in protein engineering context. And so I think central to building Cradle is the recognition that there are so many labs all across the world doing research on proteins. And not all of those need to have like a full walk-away end-to-end hyper throughput setup in order to be able to leverage their data more effectively and fine-tune these models to the point where they can really make suggestions that allow the research to go like 2x and beyond faster. And so we see that there's huge opportunity for us to bring this platform and make it available to teams all around the world doing this type of research, even when their throughput is 96 variants, so one plate of variants per round, rather than like a full automated robotic walk-away lab setup.
So basically, as I see from what you're saying, you're a platform company, and by the nature of this business model, you're a community builder kind of company. So you try to build community around yourself, the, the folks who will be using the service, and connecting it with whatever processes they have in a wet lab facilities. That's probably the story.
Yep. So Cradle will be a software, or is a software platform where wet lab experimental scientists can collaborate directly with their bioinformatics colleagues, with machine learning colleagues. The data lives centrally on that platform and is all used to make the models better with every new set of experimental results that comes back. Of course, we're only a part of the biology tech stack, if you want to call it that. So we would love for this ecosystem to strengthen and really work together with providers that make DNA, vendors of experimentation, all the different companies working on cool applications of protein engineering. And so we really believe in building that ecosystem, and for companies not to have to reinvent the wheel every time. So one of the ways in which Cradle can really accelerate bringing machine learning into companies is that you no longer have to do all that infrastructure setup and all the testing and the benchmarking of all these models. And instead, as Cradle, we can show you this is the performance of our models historically on these types of projects, and the setup is ready to go. You can kick off a project tomorrow if you have your wet lab set up in order.
Oh, cool. Sounds very exciting. My next question is about career. Traditionally, I've been working dealing basically with a lot of IT folks. Like I was running essentially an IT department at a large company some time ago, and so the talented IT guys, machine learning engineers, let's say, etc., they all kind of live in this dream where they land a job in Google, all these pure play companies, large companies in consumer industries, software development, whatever. But now, probably the first time in the whole history of of this trend, I see that there is some dynamics shifting towards life sciences, because most probably catalyzed by those big companies that like Google, Amazon, which are actually starting to invest and enter the space as well. So everybody is kind of trying to realize the value, and that we're living in the central biology, so to speak. And so it's becoming more and more attractive career-wise. But still, in my opinion, there is a knowledge gap. There's a misunderstanding on the side of folks who are not, let's say, life science experts by background. They're IT guys, they're technology experts. And sometimes they might have an expression that's so biology is so complicated, it's such a difficult thing to understand. How can I apply my knowledge? I better go build applications for food delivery or whatever. So can you explain, maybe give some advice for the folks who are thinking about doing something big and something really impactful with their technology, skills? Maybe what they should focus on. Maybe they just apply for the job or whatever. Maybe they need to have some training on Coursera, like our biology or whatever. What's the path for typical talented IT student with the computer science background, let's say, or something like that?
Yeah, I love that you're seeing this trend. We're also seeing it, and we welcome talent from all across to come into bioengineering, because I think in the next century we're going to see some really, really cool and impactful developments in the field. We at Cradle have a super interdisciplinary team, so hardcore experimental biologists, protein engineers, bioinformaticians, theoretical physicists, computer science degrees, mathematicians, statisticians. And so it's really a melting pot of all these different disciplines. The best advice that I could give is really build out a core expertise, like build out a set of things that you can bring, a set of insights that you can bring, and then follow your curiosity into the other fields. And so read papers that are at the intersection of the fields, figure out where the fields meet, and just read about it. Start with reading the popular scientific articles, go on bioarchives, look at what's there, talk to people, ask, attend meetups. But as long as you have like a hard skill that you can bring, I think, there's a lot that can come from that interdisciplinary work. And because these are such deeply technical fields, it is really useful for people to have the advanced work experience or advanced degree in one field, and then learn to connect that to the other field. And I think, like, I expect that academic institutions will also increasingly offer courses that are more tailored to this intersection, because there's so much happening at it right now. But don't worry if that's not something that you don't have a chance to within your academic program or your current job. There are ways to make that jump and then learn through curiosity. So at Cradle, one of our cultural values is being a steward of the skills that you own. So like doing that work and bringing those insights, being a generous teacher. So taking others on board and showing them what you can do and what you can bring. And then also just being a really, really curious student. So learning what makes work in the other disciplines difficult, going into the lab, seeing what it takes to generate like a data point from that prediction that was made a couple of weeks earlier.
Great advice. Follow curiosity. That's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so much fun too.
I totally agree with you that probably the biggest things that will be happening from now on are in the interdisciplinary, because we are living in the world where everything is, combined together. Actually, when I was in the academia, like it was like more than a decade ago, 15 years ago, there was still this kind of separation between fields. Let's say we had material science, which was very strictly, and then I had sensors. Let's say I was into sensors at some point in my time, biological sensors. And again, the computational things were, of course, a thing already, but it was still kind of very, very focused area. But now I increasingly see that everything is coming together. All the biggest things in Nature, published in Nature, Science, all this kind of top papers, they are typically interdisciplinary kind of products or discoveries. So it's just such an exciting time to be in this field, especially with the hard knowledge. Like it's pretty difficult to learn machine learning, let's say, and it's even more difficult to learn biology. But when somebody can do both, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's honestly one of the reasons why I think we started Cradle. Like we had this intuition, and Steph and Ela and Yella recognized the advances of machine learning and their potential impact. But then we really got so excited just by learning about each other's disciplines and having that time to interview folks, learn about the work that is happening, and explore all these crazy ideas. And I think by placing yourself, like being in that beginner mindset for a longer period of time, because you're in this interdisciplinary team, really allows you to ask questions that maybe you wouldn't if you assumed like a shared background always from your coworkers. So I've experienced it as a really rewarding thing.
My final bit of questions here are about your vision about the future. Like, what do you expect this year? Like 2023 was really a mixed year for the life sciences. On the one hand, it was just a banner year in terms of all the breakthroughs on the scientific side of things, like gene editing, artificial intelligence, lots of things happening. But on the other hand, it was a kind of challenging year in in venture capital, in IPO financial markets for the biotech industry. So it was a rough year in some ways. So what do you expect about 2024? Because I've seen a lot of optimism for some reason. Like on the JP Morgan, there are many like folks talking about probably there is some caution optimism about this year in the industry, and probably we will see more venture capital deals, more partnerships, more activity. What's your feeling like? What's your realistic expectation from this year?
Well, I think there are, it's the world is a fluctuating place. There are hype cycles that we deal with. There's macroeconomic trends. There are a lot of sticks that can block the engine, so to say. But I do believe that like important technologies that have demonstrated impact over and over again will be here to stay. I think machine learning within protein engineering is here to stay. We're figuring out where it's most applicable and where it's challenging. And I think that we will continue to see just a breadth of utilization of machine learning and protein engineering. And I expect that the investments will follow that as well. If you look at the long term. What I believe, or what we believe at Cradle, is that there's going to be commoditization as well of these technologies in the longer run. And we think that that is also a good thing. Like if more teams integrate machine learning, advanced machine learning approaches into the way that they work, adapt their data collection practices to really match that and allow the models to optimally learn, that ultimately will lead to better outcomes for patients and for the environment. So I'd say trust in doing the science and building these core technologies, and then testing where they're best applied.
Okay, so the strong science and strong technology will lead us through the financial hurdles anyway.
And in the end, experimental results don't lie, right? You can say all you want about a technology. You need to show that it does work, and that you do take steps towards those goals. And as long as we as an industry show that is possible, and that we're delivering on that promise, I think the sky's the limit in terms of what you can expect.
Well, that's nice to hear. I have also some cautious optimism about everything. Seeing all these discoveries being made is phenomenal. So let's hope for the better in this year. Hopefully, the world will become a little bit better place. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for this insightful explanation. And yep, thank you very much. Bye bye.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. Cheers.